Hello, guys out there from PE Slick Podcast and Soaps Past fans. This is your host Ranger Met. Thanks again for tuning in. If you saw my podcast earlier with producer Joe Boyd, check it out. If you didn't earlier, it's on PE Slick Podcast here on YouTube. Joining me live today is a well-known guest on The Guiding Light, Mr. Robert Newman. He played Josh Lewis from 81 to 84, 86 to 91, and then from 93 until the show ended. He also played Prescott on General Hospital and Kirk on Santa Barbara, and I'm thrilled to have him on. Let me just bring him aboard.
Hello.
Hey, Robert.
How you doing, Matt?
How you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thank you.
I'm
Thanks for
swell.
having me on.
Hey, listen, I'm glad I finally got a hold of you. Thanks for coming aboard today.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. How you holding up during this pandemic?
Probably the same way you are. It's just a day-to-day thing. I'm definitely having I've definitely had enough of it, but I don't see it going anywhere for a very long time.
Yeah.
My business is closed, obviously. There's no theater being done at all. There is some television work that's being done here and there, and I'm starting to get a few little things coming in from my agents, regarding television work. So we'll see if something happens there. But my wife, fortunately, her business, she's an interior designer, does a lot of work in Manhattan and Greenwich, Connecticut, New Canaan, Connecticut, those areas, and that's still running strong. And so in a way, I kind of work for her more than I work anywhere else right now. And I always joke that she pays me in martinis and golf. So, I help her with her business basically. But, it's just trying to get through the day to day of this time. I know it'll pass someday. But there are a lot of things that I miss. I am getting out to play golf. That seems to be the most COVID friendly sport you can possibly play. So that's helpful. But otherwise, just getting through every day.
Okay. And like I've told everybody else who's been on here, if you have any questions for me about my liking of Guiding Light, you're welcome to ask it.
Okay.
So where are you from, Robert?
I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California, specifically in Encino in the San Fernando Valley. I grew up there. My parents divorced when I was quite young, and I grew up primarily with my father and stepmother.
Okay.
Prior to the divorce, there were 5 of us, 1 brother and 3 sisters. And then after my father remarried, I had 2 younger stepbrothers then. So we were a family of 7.
Right.
And went to high school at Birmingham High School in Van Nuys, California, and took my theater degree at Cal State University at Northridge. That was in 1980. And right after I graduated, I went up to Michigan to the Barn Theater, where I still work frequently as an apprentice, and spent a summer there getting my union card, my equity card for theater. And right from there, I went out to New York for what was supposed to be just a few days, about a week or so, to meet some people. I had signed with an agent in LA. He had an office in New York. He wanted me to meet some people. And so I went and stayed with a friend and met some people. And one of the agents said, "Hey, do you want to go out for a soap opera audition?" And I had never seen a soap opera. I never watched soap operas. But I was ready to go, and I wanted to move to New York, particularly for my theater work. I wanted to move to New York. That's the center of theater.
Right.
And so I went in and auditioned for Betty Ray, who was the casting director at that time, and she ran me down the hall to meet Doug Marlin, who was the head writer of the show at that time. And they handed me an 8-page scene and said, "Can you screen test tomorrow?" And I said, "Sure." And showed up the next day. There were, I think, 6 of us, and Scott Price was one of them, actually, from As the World Turns, and they cast him from that screen test as Craig Montgomery.
Right.
And they somehow cast me as Josh. And I had 6 days to go home to Los Angeles, where I hadn't been in 3 months, and pack up my life and move to New York City. And I did. And you described the rest of that earlier in your intro. You know, I spent 3 years on the show. I quit for 2 years. I spent another 3 years, I think, on the show, and quit for another 2 years. And by the time I came back, I think the last time it was after my daughter was born, so probably 92 or something like that. By then, you know, we had 2 kids, and it was time to just settle down. And so I just stayed with the show from then on in.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Long answer. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
I should have said this in the beginning, but I'm going to say this now. At the time I got hooked on Guiding Light, it was in 2001. I was in second grade as a kid.
Okay.
And, it may seem odd because I'm a kid watching the soap opera. But what drew me to the show and soaps in general was at the time, you know, I was a kid. I did kid stuff, watched kid shows, played video games and all that. But I was also going through a transitional period because my mother raised me on her own, and we moved a lot, and I was being bullied because I was a little bigger then, so I was bullied from that. And my escape was watching soap operas, and that led to me writing a lot.
That's
I did some
great.
short films when I was in college. I did one called Shaking Ground after the Temptations song Shaky Ground. And that was a soap opera. And up until last year, I was making a lot of short films, and that came from watching soaps. And when I first saw soaps, it was Young and the Restless. And I was like, okay, adults in the boardroom and the bedroom. What is this? What is I got on As the World Turns, and then Forgotten Light. I talked to Beth Chamberlain about this. She was on my show. My intro was at the time I was doing a lot of St. Cristobal storylines, and Danny Santos was the hit of the show, also doing a lot of major with the mob and all that. Josh was with Olivia, and Reba was with Noah Chase at the time.
Right. Yeah, sure. The hunky island guy, I think we used to call him.
My intro to the show was Beth trying to escape from Edmund from the towers, and the rope snapped and she fell. And seeing you was with Olivia, but then you later found out she's working with Alan Spalding, and then you ended up remarrying Reva, and that's when Vanessa came back, Trish came back, and Daniel Cosgrove joined as Bill Lewis. This was all in 2002.
That was a good year.
Yeah. And that's when I got hooked. I started taping the show around 2004 when they made Grant's character Philip kind of the bad guy, and they killed him off. And Reva and you were still together on and off. I think the only thing I did not, I kind of scratched my head a little bit because this was during my high school years. They paired you with Cassie, and I was like, okay, Josh is with Reva's sister after all these years. I don't know, but
you're not the only fan that said that to me. That was a tough story for the fans, I think.
Yeah. I know at the time, you guys was had like a transitional period going on because Jerry had left, Danny and Michelle had left, Edmund was gone, like the cast had shortened a bit. And at the time I thought, well, maybe because y'all cast was short and that they just paired you with Cassie just because of the budget, I guess. But y'all grew on me. But of course I was happy when you got back together at the very end, you know.
Yeah, they had talked about Josh and Cassie as a possibility, you know, for a while prior to it actually happening, and then they finally decided to sort of go for it, and unfortunately, it was the same time that Laura Wright left the show and went to the West Coast and started out on General Hospital, so they had to do a very fast recast because there wasn't a lot of notice. And because normally if an actor who's that popular leaves the show, they will almost always wait 6 months before they're going to cast somebody else, because they want enough time to have passed so the audience can sort of let go how they felt about that actor playing that role, and they might be willing to now accept another actor playing a role. But they cast Nicole Forrester fairly quickly, who I adored, and I really tried to be there for her in a very difficult transition time, and then they sort of postponed that relationship for a little while so people could get used to Nicole, and then they just sort of dived in, and I look back on that, and I think there was a lot of things that just weren't working with that, not the least of which was what you've already said about Josh and Cassie being together. I always looked at that and I thought, well, Reva was married to my father and she was married to my brother, so there's precedent here. But I think too, they were trying to tell a story that was just almost overcomplicated in a way, because if you recall, Reva had cancer and didn't tell Josh.
Right.
So that was one story, right? And that could be its own story. That doesn't have to be anything else. That could just be its own story.
Right.
And because she wasn't telling the truth to Josh, he felt isolated and betrayed in a way, And then they started this story of Josh going into Cassie's arms. I think, in my view, it was because he was feeling cut off from Reva. And that could have been its own story without Reva, being involved. But I think the audience saw in that story was Josh is having an affair with Reva's sister while she has cancer. So that kind of killed the whole thing right from the beginning. Oh, and the other element was the recasting. That some people liked Nicole, some people didn't like Nicole. I don't know how different the story would have been if Laura had still been there. I don't know. We'll never know. But so there were all of these sort of elements around that story that just sort of crushed the relationship part of it. And, they eventually just sort of ended it unceremoniously, and we all moved on. But, that wasn't the worst story I'd ever been involved in on that show. The cloning story was very, very difficult story to tell. And the time travel story was really difficult. There were a lot of stories that to me were much more problematic than the Josh Cassie relationship.
Oh yeah. And it's interesting too, over the years, you guys were never one of those, you and Kim was never one of them actors who was on the show and then when the storyline ended, y'all had to rest. Y'all was always thrown in different storylines left and right, kept y'all employed. And that's what I ended up loving about Reva and Josh. I actually remember the time travel storyline. I had the soap opera digest with y'all on the front when that first happened.
I enjoyed that story up until I went through the painting. Because prior to going through the painting, I lost you visually, I think. Are you still there? Are you still hearing me? Are you hearing me? Are you back?
Oh, sorry about that.
There you are. That's all right.
Okay.
That's all right. I was saying that I liked the time travel storyline until Josh went through the painting, because prior to that, I was just playing these different characters, in a fictional history, and there was, I think one was like a Scottish groundskeeper or something like that, and one was a Civil War general or captain or something. Those were fun because that was just sort of my stage work kicking in and just play acting, But then Josh followed Reva through the painting and the whole thing just fell apart for me. But that was a tough story. The clone story was probably by far and away the most difficult time on Guiding Light. And I enjoyed it to a certain extent. but it was just so far removed. Same thing with time travel, so far removed from what we do best. You know, we're not a science fiction show. Our best stories involve fathers and sons and daughters and husbands and wives, and we're telling stories about families that are together and families that are broken up. And to me, that was the true power of Guiding Light. So to get sidetracked into this nonsense, you know, it never really made sense to me. But I always tried to make the best of whatever storyline I was handed. You know, I keep getting this thing from my blinds here, but there it is again. Look at that. So I always chose to fully commit to whatever storyline they gave me. And that included Cassie, by the way. So I would, that was not my job. My job was to interpret material as it was given to me and do it to the best of my ability. And that's what I tried to do for all those years on the show.
Right.
I thought of it as there were times with storylines when I would think of it, I would think if this were a play, I would have read it and not auditioned for it.
Right.
That's how I felt about the cloning storyline. I just wouldn't have auditioned for that play. But others, because I often thought of storylines, they would arc over several months, but I would think of them as more of like a theater piece. I think it just helped me with my theater training to think of things in that way.
Yeah. The cloning storyline, when I first saw it, at first I was like, clone. In the beginning, when Peter Herman, who was Michael Burke, when he approached you, this is Reva. At first, I thought, okay, did Reva have another twin that y'all didn't know about, and then she ages up because Joey Lynch played Reva, who went on to play Michelle Bauer for a short period of time.
Yeah,
and then Kim Zimmer come back to play. Actually, hold it right here. This is a picture I have of you two when she was Dolly from 1998. This was in Soap Opera Digest that I have from '98, and this is a picture. This is a picture of you two when you was hugging her at the fountain.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, it was just a weird story. That moment you just talked about, Peter Herman handing me Reva, because that happened like within days of the story starting. I mean, that was like I was drunk. The doctor shows up. We talk about cloning. I go to him in a drunken stupor. I agree to it. And then the next morning, Josh wakes up hungover and tracks down the doctor and says, I don't want to do this. And he says, it's too late. And he goes in the back room and comes back, and there was a little preemie that they had hired for the show. And he says, Josh Lewis, meet Reva Shane. And in dress rehearsal, Peter and I just broke out laughing hysterically at the moment. And the crew and the entire crew, and then Paul Rausch, the executive producer, came barreling out of the studio and pulled me to the side. He said, you have to take this seriously. You got to do this. Blah, 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 blah. And I said, Paul, you got to, first of all, back away from me. And secondly, I have to be able to laugh at this. I'm never going to laugh about it when the red light's on. But if you don't let all of us recognize the insanity of what we're doing right now, it's just not going to be beneficial for anyone. So I'll laugh about it if I choose to, and you're just going to have to deal with that. And he backed off pretty quick, but it was, and Peter was an absolute joy. I had known him a little bit before that, and I really liked working with him a lot. And then they did that whole rapid growth thing where we had a baby, and then a toddler, and then a kid, and then there was Joy, and then I think after that it was Reva, and then she, of course, dies of old age in her arms. Dolly died of old age in Reva's arms because she OD'd on her. The whole story was just absurd.
Yeah, the lady who does Soap Digest or something, her name is Mimi. She said that in an interview once. She said that once in an interview that when the character was kind of liked finally, that's when they killed her off with the growth. She OD'd on her growth medicine.
Right.
That was I liked Kim's acting in that, where they made her look older, and she was on. Y'all took her to Cross Creek, and then it was just. I like that scene. that y'all
Oh,
did
she was
there.
great in that storyline. Kim did. I can't think of any time that Kim has not done good work. I mean, and she did tremendous work in that story, especially playing both of those characters. We were not popular with the rest of the cast for two reasons. One is if you were in on a day that the clone had lots of scenes, you knew it was going to be a long day because we would have to shoot a first pass at all the scenes with Kim playing the clone, say, and then a body double playing Reva on the other side. And then we would break and they would go to some other set and do something else. And during that time, Kim would now get into Reva mode and the body double would go into Dolly mode. And then we would reshoot all of those scenes again. And so all those days were, and if you were later in the day past that, we were already off schedule by a couple of hours every single day. And the other thing was they just didn't want to be in the story, the cast, and I would hear about it, and it's like, God damn it, I have to have a scene with Dolly today, and I'd be like, that's how it goes. Just do your work and let's keep moving forward.
Yeah. I didn't know if you knew the answer to this or not, but well, unfortunately, when the story ended, we saw Michael Burke blow himself up in the Spalding lab. Unfortunately, was Peter let go? Was his time ending when that happened? When Michael Burke died?
Oh, right. Yeah, I forgot about that. No, he was just on a short-term contract. I don't think that Peter wanted a long-term contract at that time because he had done a fair amount of nighttime work. And so I think for him, it was like a 4-month or 6-month deal or something like that. That's kind of similar to what I did on Santa Barbara. That was a 6-week contract to play Kirk Cranston on Santa Barbara. It was a 4-month contract on General Hospital to play Kirk. I wasn't in the market for a longer term contract. I'd already done that on Guiding Light, and I was looking. I wanted to pay bills, of course, but I basically just wanted like a short term. And I wasn't even sure I wanted to stay in Los Angeles. And both of those shows were Los Angeles based, and ultimately it turned out I didn't want to stay in Los Angeles. So sometimes actors are signed on only for a day, a week. Sometimes recurring is a thing. We had a few, like Robert Lapone, who's Patty's brother, had a recurring role as a lawyer, and I can't remember the name of the character that he played, but he was on quite a bit.
Flynn.
Terrence Mann came on, I think, a few times. He and Kim had scenes together. So in fact, I was just, I shouldn't say this out loud. One of the soaps in LA reached out to my agent about a recurring character, and I said, no, thank you. Because I don't live there anymore, and I don't want to be flying back and forth whenever they want to use me for an episode or 2 episodes or something. And I've done the soap thing. I've been there, done that, and I just don't need to do it anymore. I am doing Melange. It looks like Melange is a web series that we shot a pilot for with Morgan Fairchild. Playing my wife, and the pilot went over pretty big, and I just heard that we're going to shoot 7 of those, maybe as early as mid-October. But otherwise, I don't really want, and that's going to be in New York City, so I won't be traveling. And they sent me a fairly extensive, outline of how they're going to make it safe for everybody, and a lot of it seems to make sense. So we'll see how that goes. Yeah. But I wouldn't want to at this point yet. My agents reached out to me about a Hallmark movie being shot in Salt Lake City, and I said, I'm not going to get on a plane to Salt Lake City right now. I'm just not going to do that. That just sounds irresponsible. So I'm about to have my first grandchild. My daughter and my son and daughter-in-law. She's pregnant, a little boy, and he's due next month.
Congratulations.
Yeah. And so I don't want to take any big risks right now for obvious reasons. Yeah, I'm really excited.
Well, you kind of answered that question. I had a fan on who asked if you had interest to do any of the other 4 shows that's on the air today. Well, you did your time on GH, but you're going to Wrestlers, Bold, or Days.
I didn't. You cut out for 1 second there. What were you saying?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I was saying
That's okay.
that kind of answered a fan's question. They had asked if you had any interest to do any of the other four shows that's on the air today.
Oh, yeah. My wife, occasionally we talk about if one of them came to me with a long-term contract, whether or not we'd really, we'd actually consider a move back out to the West Coast, because I grew up there in a big family. I have a lot of family out there. They would all be thrilled to pieces if I moved out to the West Coast, but it's just, my heart is here on the East Coast. It just is. And so I don't really see that happening.
Okay. You got a couple of fans here. One fan named Karen says you look great, and
Thanks.
she misses GL. And I got another fan, Mr. Black, here, who says, are you still in touch with Jordan Clark, who played Billy?
Yeah, I haven't seen him for a few months now, but I stopped by his farm. I was doing a production of Man of La Mancha, which I actually have a painting of right there. That yeah. I was doing a production of that show in near Philadelphia, and on the way, after it closed the next day, on the way home, I stopped at Jordan's farm and visited with him and his wife. And I think it's pretty much out there that he's not been well. Let's put it that way. So he's not working anymore. He was going to be with us for Venice, the series, the one that Crystal Chappelle produces and directs and writes, for season 6, I guess, which aired last year. Kim and I were both part of that, and he was supposed to be, and he just said he couldn't do it. So as far as I know, he's not doing any more. He's not doing any more work.
I'm sorry
Sweet,
to hear that.
really sweet guy. We our relationship on screen was very much reflected off screen. We talked a lot about the craft and a lot about life, and he's one of those actors. I think of Justin this way too, but they've just experienced a lot of stuff in their lives, and they wear it outwardly almost, and
Right.
I always felt greatly blessed to work with the likes of Jordan and Kim and Larry Gates, who was a mentor to me. I was just surrounded by brilliant actors all the time. And it's part of why I get so frustrated when I hear people talk, even in my business, talk disparagingly of soap opera actors, because I've worked with some brilliant actors on that show.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
I'm gonna turn my phone around for a second. Thinking about you and Jordan, I have a clip right here of you and Billy. This was in 1989. It was you and Billy and HB. Y'all was at a party because Reba was pregnant and Billy had punched you out. And this is a scene right here after that happened. Turn my phone around.
Get on with it, or no supper for either one of you. You can't make us do this.
Look, we really won't do it again.
Come on, assume the position. You know the drill. Hurry up, Kevin. I'm hungry. This is really stupid. Keep staring until one of you blows it.
Oh, that's stupid.
That's it.
Yeah, that was I like that scene, that episode there. I watched episodes from the 80s and 90s. I got some on DVD as well that I ordered after the show ended. But those episodes I love the most. What are your memories of working with H.B. Lewis himself, Larry?
I had a very tricky relationship with my father, my own father, and in many ways, Larry sort of stepped in for a period of time and became like a father figure to me. And I've always said that I've the most important things I know about acting I learned from Larry. And not only the kinds of things he used to talk about, but also just watching his work and working opposite him for so many years. You know, he had a very extensive film career prior to the soap opera, and but he always said that he felt that the best time he ever had as an actor were his years on Guiding Light. And when we found out he had cancer, he continued to work for a period of time, but then it came a point when he just couldn't anymore. And he had a house up in a little further upstate in Connecticut than where I am right now, in a beautiful little town and surrounded by woods. And I went up there about once a month in his last 5 or 6 months of life, and we would just sit and talk for a couple of hours about the craft and about life and everything, you know. And I kick myself every day now that I didn't bring a video recorder and just put it on a tripod over here and just let him talk about things, because I wish I had all of that. Today, I wish I had it all. I wish I could go back and look at that. And then he was gone, you know. And then I gave the eulogy at his funeral, and it was really beautiful. The whole service was beautiful. A lot of great people there. I remember I met Sam Waterston that day. He was there. He had worked with Larry and knew him well.
Right.
And they didn't know what to do with HB. And, you know, I really pushed them, probably more than I pushed on a lot of things, but I pushed them to not recast that role. And I think it was 5 or 6 months later that they finally, you know, we had a scene where HB died. And then the writers reached out to me because one of them had been at the service for Larry and said, you know, would you be interested in writing your own eulogy for HB? And I said, yeah, I would be interested in that. So, and that was an interesting experience because I wrote it, and of course they edited it. It was too long. And weirdly, writing it, part of it was for Larry, and part of it was for HB, and part of it was for my own dad, and it was so many different things going on, but it turned out really very well. In fact, I just watched a big hunk of that episode not long ago. Watching little Mara talking about jumping the waves, little Kimberly Brown, you know, that kind of thing. And it was a good episode. And Kim and Jordan and I have told this story before that particularly we were sitting around a table like in the kitchen or something like that, waiting for scenes, and we would be laughing and crying and telling Larry Gates stories. And then they would roll tape, and there we were laughing and crying and telling H.B. Lewis stories. And it was such a extraordinary marriage of life and fiction, you know. They just overlapped each other all day, all week long. You know, it was a little rough because it was almost like going through Larry's death a second time.
Right.
But you know, we all loved him. We all loved him completely, and he was just an extraordinary human being.
Yeah. My apologies. I didn't make you so emotional.
That's just me. I love that man with all my heart, and I miss him.
I didn't. Of course, I didn't know him, but I was a fan of his work as HB, because HB was a character who didn't take no nonsense. If you ticked off the Lewis family about trouble, he always was not afraid to stand up to you. And I also liked his work with another classmate of his that's gone too. He played Henry Chamberlain. Will Warlock.
Yeah, Bill Rourke. Yeah,
yeah,
he was a sweetheart. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, that era, that to me was more, even though he and Larry were the same, roughly age-wise, was similar. I think Bill was a little older, but I kind of separate out Bill more with Charita Bauer and and Michael Zaslow, and maybe not Zaslow, but when I first came on the show, there were these Don Stewart playing Mike Bauer. So that to me was that era. Larry was more part of our era, even though he had a lot of wonderful scenes with Bill O'Rourke, And Bill, I didn't know anywhere as I didn't know Bill as well as I knew Larry. He and I worked together from time to time, but not really a lot. I learned a lot from Bill too. I learned a lot from Jerry Vadorn and particularly from Alan Spaulding. Gosh, his name just jumped out of my head. The earlier, before Ron Raines.
Christopher Bernard.
Chris Bernard. I had this thing because I never worked in front of a camera before. When I joined Guiding Light, I was trained specifically for stage, specifically for classics, both classics and American classics. That was sort of what my sweet spot was, and but I'd never been in front of a camera. The screen test for Josh was the first time I'd ever acted in front of a camera, and so I had a lot to learn, and I knew I had a lot to learn, and I would hang out in the control room, which they would let you do at that time, and I would just watch other actors work, or I would go out onto the set, and I would just watch. And Chris Bernard was really interesting to watch, because if you were out on the set, standing 30 feet away from him, he barely moved. He just barely moved there, and it was almost surreal. But then when you would be in the control room watching him, you would see that because he was so still, the cameras could get really, really tight, and you would see all of these things happening. And that to me was what really distinguished stage acting from television acting. Stage acting, you're working with your whole body all the time, and you're visible all the time. And they're not seeing close-ups for the most part when you're stage acting. They're seeing the whole thing. And I worked in some 3,000 seat theaters where you're probably that big from the upper back balcony, So you really have to use your whole body in a different way. But film, Chris taught me about stillness. He taught me a very valuable lesson without even knowing it. I don't think he even knew that he taught me that lesson, but he did.
Right. So when you joined the show, it was under Alan Potter, correct? He was producer?
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I know we talked a bit about when you joined the show, but when you joined, how was Josh described? I understand he was a bad guy. He was a little different than I ended up being.
Yeah, he was the black sheep of the Lewis family. The Lewis family was also an oil family, which Spaulding Enterprises was also involved in oil. But it was sort of like what they were doing on Dallas, where you had the big company and the smaller, mom and pop company, and Lewis Oil. So the only Lewis on the show was Trish, played by Rebecca Holland, and my very first scene, which I just saw not long ago, was with her in a bar. And Morgan and Kelly were the big. That was John Wesley Shipp and Jennifer Cook. And Josh came in as this sort of like swaggering, not rich kid, but full of himself, and he immediately falls for Morgan, and he goes about the business of breaking up Kelly and Morgan, which makes him a bad guy already. And then I blackmailed Leslie Ann Monroe, who was played by Carolyn Clark. She had ripped me off for some money or something like that. So I was blackmailing her, and she was with Floyd, and we had a really, and Nola and Quint were doing their thing in the midst of all that, and then Marcia Clark was there, and and we were just a bunch of young actors just really having a blast, and then when Doug left and Pam Long came in, she was creating this character of Reva Shane, and she had already written in a whole backstory for her and Josh, for Reva and Josh, that included her marrying my brother Billy, right? So she just really felt like Josh had to be a good guy, and they had like a oil explosion on a rig in Venezuela, and Josh went down there and was literally giving out money to widows and orphans of the men who died, and had this sort of epiphany, and he just became a good guy. And that it was as simple as that. It was over the course of like a week. And suddenly he wasn't a bad guy anymore. And then, you know, we started the work with Josh and Reva.
Yeah.
And when we started that work, I would never have believed in 1,000 years that it would escalate as quickly as it did. Because really, by the time I left the show, a short time later, we had already established them as a fairly big super couple. I'd never heard that term before either, but that's suddenly there we were in just a short couple of years. In the first couple of years we worked together. And then I left for 2 years. And they kept reaching out to me to come back. And finally I came back. And I think that was when we had that first extraordinary wedding, somewhere around there. I don't know. I might be getting the time frames wrong. I think I'm right. But, you know, I never, there were two things. I never would have thought that I would be half of such a big entity in soap opera. You know, that just wasn't my path. And now if you Google the top 5 couples in daytime history, Josh and Reva will always be number 2 or 3, somewhere in there, you know, obviously after Luke and Laura. That's a pretty amazing accomplishment to me. And I give Kim, boatloads of credit for that.
Right.
But we really trusted each other. We really liked each other. I think we worked in very similar ways, and whatever clicked just clicked.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
and then the other thing I was going to say is that I saw, just as the show was ending, I saw the first Christmas picture I'd ever taken, which would have been in December of 1981 with the cast. And I looked at the picture, and the only person still on the show was me. And joining the show at that time, fresh out of college, 3-year contract, I never, ever would have thought that 28 years later, all of those people would be gone, and I would be the one sort of still standing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not to go off topic, but for a second, but you mentioned Dallas, and in a lot of ways, I always saw the Lewises and the Spaldings like the Ewings and Barnes.
That's what I meant. Yeah, that's exactly what I was referring to. Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, I mean, I'm sure you remember the Who Shot JR storyline that they did on Dallas. Yeah, in a lot of ways, because I got hooked on Dallas when it came on SoapNet, and that was a cable channel they did a few years ago, and that was a channel that got enlightened as it rolled times. For some reason, they didn't put that on there. But watching that show, and you guys, when it was always you and Alan tussling all the time, you and Ron Reigns had a lot of funny scenes together. There was one time when you punched him. You just came walking into his mansion house. You just did you have some memories of working with Ron, of course, and Chris, but also Daniel Pilon, who played Alan briefly?
Yeah, that was a very short-lived thing. He was a nice enough guy, but I think, that was similar to when they brought on another actor to play Billy for a period of time, and it just didn't. Sometimes actors just don't click in the role that they're cast in, and I felt that way about Daniel, like from the beginning. Like he just didn't really embody Alan Spalding, and then when Ron came in, it was like he had him nailed down, like right from the beginning. And Christopher was extraordinary. Jeff somebody played Billy for a short time, and I just knew it wasn't gonna. And that was interesting too, because he had come from the world of nighttime. He had played a role on
Dynasty. Jeffrey Scott.
One of them. Yeah, Jeffrey Scott. Yeah, but he really struggled with dialogue, and sometimes that just happens. An actor auditions for a role on a soap, they get the role, and you don't realize until a few weeks later that they just don't have that gene to spit out 30 pages of dialogue in a single day. You know,
Right.
it's a tall order. I remember asking Rob DeCina, one of our casting directors, about that. I said, how do you know? I mean, how do you, and have you ever had that happen where, and he said, sometimes, sometimes it's a miss, but for the most part, actors, that's part of what they do. They memorize dialogue. But Jeffrey had come from a world where you would shoot, I know because I've been in this world recently, where you would shoot 3 pages. One of the scenes I shot on Homeland a few years ago, it was 3 pages of 2 guys walking on the sidewalk and talking. And they called me to that set at 6 o'clock at night. It was on location in front of a restaurant in Charleston, I think. And we didn't wrap till 2 o'clock in the morning. We wrapped that 3-page scene 8 hours later at 2 a.m. And I thought we would have shot most of an episode of Guiding Light in that same period of time. I mean, but if you come from that world and you're used to only shooting, 2 or 3 pages at a time and having boatloads of hours to do it, and then you walk into a soap and they're just like, let's go. We got to be out of here at 6 o'clock. We got to move,
Right.
And some people just can't deal with it.
Yeah, I used to think watching the soaps, because I did a little play back when I was in elementary school, but I kind of suffered because I couldn't memorize some of the lines. And watching you guys, I used to think y'all used to wing it a bit, because to memorize someone's dialogue and do it in a short period of time, especially if it's like, remember when y'all had the Inside the Light episodes years later, where it was just you. Episodes like that where you have so much scenes in one, it's like, how do you do that? I used to think that a lot, like, how do you guys do that? I mean, your brain got hurt at something.
Well, it is a muscle that you exercise and you get better and better. For me, especially towards the end of our run, when the scenes were shorter and we were doing that whole handheld kind of thing, and I would think of it almost as binging and purging at that time, because I really wouldn't fully memorize a scene until I was about to, shoot it. And then I'd shoot the scene and I would just, get it out of my head as quickly as possible and go on to the next one. So it's almost like cramming for an exam, and you take the exam really fast, and then the earlier it was a little more complicated because, Doug Marlin and Pam Long and those guys, they would write very, Kim and I would have like 10-page scenes sometimes, and that would be in the middle of a, where you're in every act. The first act and the last act are shorter scenes, but then you've got, 3 or 4 in the middle, and we could have 30. I remember I was away doing a play, and I had to come back and shoot scenes from 4. It was 51 scenes from 4 episodes, and I had to shoot them all in one day on location in New Jersey. And I remember, because I remember at the lunch break we had shot 25, and honest to God, I don't know how my brain got through that, but somehow it did. And I was on a plane the next morning back to the theater. Yeah. And then I go do these other things now. I did a scene for Chicago Fire. I was in the middle of doing a play. They happened to want me on a Monday, which is a dark day for theater. I was up in Albany, and I flew from Albany after the matinee on Sunday. I flew from Albany to Chicago, got there at like midnight. They picked me up at 7 a.m. Just, again, only like a 4-page scene or something. I was done with it by about 2 p.m, and on a plane and back in Albany on Tuesday to do the evening performance on, In the last 4 months of Guiding Light, I was doing a musical called Sessions, an off-Broadway musical. And that was also during the time of PPAC. So PPAC, New Jersey, is a 100-mile drive from my house, then in North Salem. So I'd have to be there at 7 a.m., leaving at 5 a.m. to get there at 7. I'd shoot there. Very frequently, I would then have other scenes in the studio in Manhattan at the Broadcast Center. And then I would have a curtain at 8 o'clock for sessions that would end at about 10:30 or so. And if I was coming in the next day, then there were many times when I just actually slept in my dressing room at the broadcast center because it was a 24-hour facility because it's a news facility.
Right.
And there was a shower down the hall, and I would put a note on my door not to disturb me, and my alarm would go off. I'd get up and take a shower, and I had a blow-up mattress. I mean, it was crazy. I don't think I could do that today.
I saw the interview you did with the locker room where Alan had all the Maras on there, and I know too you worked with a lot of guys that played Shane. The last guy Marty West was Shane around the time I started watching the show, and then the last one y'all had Jeff Branson, who was on All My Children.
Yeah, he was great.
What was it like with those guys? All the Shane.
I think we talked about this on that interview, because I just never felt like they really, until Jeff, I never felt like they really developed the character of Shane in the same way that they had done with Mara. That Shane was almost like an afterthought, and that Mara was really the focus, because like Kimberly Brown and Ashley Peldon and they all did, Laura Bell Bundy, they all really had some great arcs of storylines to work through, but Shane's were always just sort of, so the actors were all fine, but they didn't give the character its due, I don't think, until Jeff took on the role, and then they really started writing, I think. And I think part of it was, when I think of Jeff, I think a little bit of Tom Pelphrey too, because these are two guys who they come on and they're just so good from the first day. And then it almost, well, I know this for a fact. As the writers get to know you, then they start to write you in a different way. They start writing either more of you or less of you, or and that's what happened to me too with Doug Marlin, and Pam Long. Once they got to know my strengths and weaknesses, that's what they would write to. So I think they gave Jeff more to chew on because he could, and he really. That was the first time I really felt like they wrote the character well.
Yeah.
And he was a terrific actor.
And you and Tom, I mean, those scenes you two had, because Jonathan was just so out there, because I remember I was, like I said, I watched the show from 2000. I got hooked on the other shows. When I came back to watching it again, Tom was on the show. And I was like, well, who's the Jonathan guy? And you two had the scene I was arguing and he fell down the stairs backwards, and
he's a character, Tom.
Yeah.
Tom is one of those actors. I recently saw some episodes from my first year on that show, and honest to God, I just sucked. I was not a good actor in those days, and I watched those scenes and I cringe watching them. I really do. And I mean, there's moments with like HB, and there's moments with Reva, but that first year in particular, I was figuring a lot of things out very quickly, and it's very apparent to me. Every once in a while, you get somebody like Tom who just comes in and he's just absolutely the real deal from the moment he walks on the set, and he was so similar to Jonathan, not the bad guy Jonathan, but just in his phrasing and his power and his the way he moved and everything. He was just really one of a kind of actor, and I loved working with him. I didn't get to work with him enough, unfortunately.
Yeah,
he's how I envisioned that Jordan probably was at that age, or Justin Dees probably was amazing, at that age, but I wasn't.
Yeah. And let me tell you, I mean, Tom, you guys during that time, it was just something. And I gotta admit, when the first time I saw Jonathan take a turn was when he eventually fell in love with Tammy and they started making out. Even though in the beginning I was like, wait a minute, they're cousins, they're family. That's it.
Yeah, but, she was a sweetheart too. Yeah.
And in a weird way, I admired Tom because I think he was the only male in the show who had long hair and would put in a ponytail, other than Vince Williams. Yeah,
Vince. Oh man, he died too young.
Yeah,
such a big heart. Oh man, Vince, sax player.
I would call him that. The phone man.
Just the big heart, man. Good memories
Yeah.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, one guy who I interviewed who was on your show who says hi. We talked a few months ago. He had a lot of great memories of working with you and Jordan. Brian Buffington, who was Bill.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's a sweetheart. You know, he was kind of a salt of the earth Bill. You know, he wasn't like the dangerous Bill that we would see later. Like that was Danny, right? Cosgrove, didn't Cosgrove end up playing Bill? Yeah.
Right.
So that was not Brian. Brian was more like the wholesome Bill. And then that character evolved as other actors came in and took it over. But Brian was a sweetheart. Yeah. Yeah. It was really touching to me to do the interview with the four Maras a few weeks ago because, you know, they all talked about what they learned from us, you know, and I was reminded that, oh my God, when I work with younger actors, you're teaching them by example. And I do this in theater now all the time, you know, whenever I'm working on stage and I'm working with all these young, particularly ensemble players, or these multiple productions of Annie that I've done around the country playing Daddy Warbucks, you know, I'm always I want to be the first one there in rehearsal. I want to be off book immediately. I want to come in basically off book. I work very hard not to have a little like temper tantrumy kind of things because I realize that they're all looking at me and seeing how I approach this business. And by example, you're teaching them, you know, the best way to work through, you know, these things. I work with some actors who really throw, you know, big temper tantrums, and I just sit back and I'm like, you know, that's just not the way we should be doing this business. It's just not. We get paid to make believe for a living. That's a great blessing, and we should all be thankful for it and just enjoy the process. One of the things that I love so much about stage work that I missed during the soap is the rehearsal process. You know, you don't get that in soaps. You just don't. You're making the best choice you can and committing to it 100%, and off you go for every single scene. But you don't get a chance to really rehearse and build a character. So I'm very happy with the work I'm doing on stage now. I just miss it during COVID.
And I loved your work as Josh Lewis. I mean, I know I haven't seen I don't know if there's anything on YouTube of this stage work, but from what I've seen over the years of you as Josh, you know, you took that character. He's had a lot of big stories over the years, and he was something else. And I definitely want to send a shout out as a fan point of view myself. Thank you, Robert, what you've done over the years on that show. And I was in high school. I was telling Tina Sloan this because I'm good friends with her. She sent me both her books. I was in high school when the word came out that she was canceled on April Fool's Day, and I thought, you know, maybe it was a joke, or maybe if something were to happen, somehow the show would be saved. Because I hope, because, you know, to me it's like, you guys were on for so many years, you can't just plug in a game show or a talk show. It's like, how do you do that? But I know, even though it happened, it's like, you know, I was disappointed. Yeah.
I kind of saw it coming before others did because of all my work with the union. I was on the national board for Screen Actors Guild and for AFTRA, and so I kind of knew that this was coming our way. And you know, I said later, Kim and I were doing a 60 Minutes interview about the show, and he said, you know, how do you feel about, you know, the show ending? And I said, you know, I signed a 3-year contract 28 years ago. I really don't have anything to complain about. You know, if all my gigs could be like that, you know, that would be fantastic. I said, you know, I'm going to miss it terribly. And, you know, but for me, it was really time for me to go on and do other kinds of work, you know, and it was tricky at first because I'd been away from the stage for a while, but, you know, I've just continued to stay busy. I miss the, one of the byproducts of long-term soap work is you become a bit of a workaholic. You're so accustomed to working 3 to 5 days a week, every week. You know what you're doing next week and next month and next year. And And in my regular actor's life now, I work 6 weeks in North Carolina playing Warbucks, and then I'm back here for a couple of weeks, and then I do a couple of days on the Homeland, and then I'm back here, and then it's like it's just this. There's so much sort of time in between gigs now, and it's taken me a long time to sort of adjust to that and be comfortable with it, and know that just because I'm not working this week, it doesn't mean I'm not good at what I do and not valuable, But I'm really proud of the multiple characters I've been playing on stage in musicals and non-musicals, and really bringing some of these guys to life in my way, with my voice and my body and the way I work. The couple times Kim and I have worked together on stage, were extraordinary. We did Gypsy together. We did Lion in Winter together, and then most recently we did Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf together, which just about killed us both. But she's just a fantastic presence to be on stage with. And in those roles, you also sort of see a bizarre continuation of Josh and Reva, which is kind of interesting. Like if I were to, I don't know how well you know Virginia Woolf, but there's a part of me that thinks that's almost exactly who Josh and Reva might be today. This older couple that just destroys each other and everyone around them, just for fun, like a game, But I'm very pleased with my career and my work.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. What do you think Josh would be doing today in 2020 if the show was still on the air?
Well, he'd probably be on about his 12th marriage. He was married 9 times on the show. So probably he and Reva would have gotten married again and then divorced again. And then he'd probably be on maybe, so it was 9, that would be 10, maybe. Yeah, probably on about his 12th marriage right now. I don't know. Fans have asked me, on the street, what are Josh and Reva doing now? And I say, well, Kim's with her granddaughter in New Jersey, and I'm, I don't know how to answer that question, But I think, given the history of the show and the character, the way they wrote those 2 characters, they constantly were breaking them apart and putting them back together again. It was like they inherently knew that once they got them together, if they kept them together for too long, then the story would become uninteresting. And so there was that cycle of putting them together and breaking them up, putting them together and breaking them up.
Yeah. And
so I have no reason to believe that wouldn't have continued over these last 10 or 11 years since the show ended. Yeah.
Yeah, and as a result of that, you both work with many different people. One person you work with that changed the show a lot, who my mother would say, if we watched the old episode, she would say, "There you girl," because I for some reason, I guess I was glued to that character. Miss Annie Dutton, Cynthia Wattrose, and also Sonny Coleman, who played her briefly too. What are your memories of working with both of them?
Well, Cynthia was spectacular, and they gave her so much great material to play that role. There are times when you're really envious of the bad guy, the actor playing the bad guy, because when you play a good guy, you just don't get that kind of stuff, But Cynthia just, it's no easy task to come between Josh and Reva. Crystal Chappelle didn't want that. Michelle Forbes didn't. It's like you pity the actress who's working between Josh and Reva. The actors seem to fare better. I mean, the audience seems to accept Reva with other men more readily than Josh with other women, and wow. I think so. But maybe I'm wrong. But Cynthia came in with both barrels blazing and just ate that character alive, and it was really fun to work with her. I really enjoyed her a lot. Signe kind of came and went, and I don't think they quite gave her the same material that they were giving to Cynthia. She did fine in the role as well. That was also a weird story because that was that mind control drug thing where Josh had this aftershave, and she would say, "Sit down, Josh," and he would do whatever she told him to do. That was also just kind of a odd story that I didn't care for.
Yeah, Paul Rouse really took y'all on an interesting journey when he was producer. That was a wild ride y'all had.
Hold on for 1 second, do you mind? I'm
Yeah,
going to
no
mute
problem.
you for just a second.
Okay.
Sorry, home life. I'm going to have to jump off this in a few minutes, but
Yeah,
are we there?
it's fine.
Okay.
No, I know we didn't really talk about a time frame because I know that you got a big history on that show, so I just wanted to touch as much as I could.
No, that's great.
Maybe if
I
you
got a few more minutes.
Okay. Well, I got another clip here on my phone. I'm gonna turn my phone around right here. This is another interesting moment of reliving Josh's time frame here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a really fun shoot. That was on Marathon Key, Florida. Yeah, that was a fun shoot. Yeah, and that was also the very beginning of the short-term Josh and Harley story, if I recall.
Yeah.
Once Reva died and Josh wouldn't come out of the bedroom, and Harley was the nanny taking care of the kids, and we sort of dovetailed into that story. Which, but weirdly, people still mention to me. They're like, I really like that Josh and Harley thing, and I'm thinking, when you're on the show for that long, a story that lasted like 6 weeks, just you barely remember it, and you don't think much about it. But I have people say to me that they really liked that pairing of Josh and Harley at that time, and the reason they didn't go forward with it was because I left the show. That was the second time I left Guiding Light, and we shot those scenes. We got, because I remember Pam. It might have been Nancy Curley actually, but one of them. I went up to the house in Connecticut, and Pam read to me the outline for the whole Josh Harley thing, really wanting me to stay, and I agreed to another 3 months, and then I was going to go, and so we shot that part of that story, but and Kim was leaving at the same time. I think that was her last episode for quite a while, I think.
Yeah. Before I let you go, I'm just gonna ask you 2 more questions. The first one, what kind of music do you listen to?
I'm a big Springsteen guy, but I grew up with pop. I grew up with Elton John and Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, and freaking like Neil Diamond and Barry Manilow and those guys, Stevie Wonder, Michael Jackson, of course. Michael Jackson lived down the street from me in Encino, California. The Jackson family had a house down the street. Yeah, and I would see, we're the same age. We were the same age, and I would see him at high school parties and stuff like that. And he would always be sort of sitting in a room by himself off in the back corner somewhere, and he would always leave fairly early. And we never really interacted much, but he was always a presence. But Springsteen has been sort of the through line for me for a lot of years, and continues to be. I just posted about he's got a new album coming out next month, and I've seen him in concert more than I've probably seen him at least 6 times in concert, more than anybody else that I've seen. But I was also, in my very younger days, it was all about the Beatles. And I was quite young in those days, but the Beatles were everything. And not a big Stones fan. I never really fell into the Stones in the same way a lot of people did. But it's so interesting to me now. Our daughter is 28, but her generation, that they still really seem to hook into the Beatles work, and it's just such a timelessness to the music that they created over the years. From the simplest at the beginning to later when it was much more psychedelic and all that. But it's interesting to me now that my daughter and we would argue about music from time to time, because she'd play something new for me and I'd say, "Oh yeah, that was Joan Baez." And like, because what she'd play for me would sound exactly like, or yeah, that's Bruce, or oh yeah, that, and I would say, like, you think you're all creating all this new music, but this is all stuff that's just being recycled,
Oh yeah.
It's just being done by younger people, and maybe less instrumentation or something, but it's still the same stuff.
Yeah.
And then it's funny, I don't really listen to the Broadway musicals, even though I've done 20 of them, but I don't really listen to Broadway stuff. It's just not that interesting to me these days. Mostly in my car I have NPR and I don't have music on, I have NPR on.
Yeah, and I like Bruce too. I was a fan of his around the time I listened to a lot of soft rock music, DB Brothers, All the Notes and all that. I like Bruce.
Yeah.
I'm a huge All the Notes. Yeah.
I think he's a good storyteller. That's part of it too. I think he's writes some of the best lyrics that are out there, at least for my generation. Unfortunately, I fell away from listening to a lot of new music a few years ago. It was like post MTV, but and I just stopped listening to live radio. And I can't tell one diva from the other.
Right.
Like, Celine Dion, and to me they all kind of the same. Boy bands all sound the same, But,
yeah. The last thing I was going to ask you was because I always loved your scenes as Josh whenever he would stand up to people. Like, you had somebody posted this on YouTube, but the channel was taken down, unfortunately, where it was like every episode of Gotten Light, and they posted where you got in Roger's face after they did the Who Shot Roger storyline, because you and Michael didn't have a lot of scenes together, but
right,
you like those scenes with you in them. But over the years, you did a lot of great material. I mean, how would you look back at your career as playing Josh and doing Broadway and everything else you've done over the years?
Well, I'm thankful to have a career. In my industry, less than 5% of the 160,000 members of Screen Actors Guild make more than $5,000 a year. Less than 5% make more than $5,000 a year. And the fact that I've always made a really good living in this business, and that people still seek me out, half the work I do doesn't even start with my agent unless it's a phone. Well, it starts with a phone call to my agent because they're looking for me to play this role somewhere. And I just am thankful for all of it. I mean, not a lot of us get paid, and paid very well during the soap days, especially to do what we do. And I've always been thankful for it. And my line to fans who stop me on the street and talk about, like you, watching me for so many years, one of my favorite lines that I say is, "Thank you for helping me put my kids through college." Because I understand this relationship between the viewer and what you guys are watching there and what we're doing here. Has to be a connection there. And if there isn't, this happens on stage for me now too, if that connection isn't there, then you're going to turn the channel and watch something else. So, I just feel like, I've been very well supported by fans. Doesn't mean that they haven't. Here I am getting my thing again. So they got pretty pissed at me during the Josh Cassie story, and appearances were a little tough when I would do personal appearances, because they were just pissed about that story. And I'd say, I don't write the show, but that wasn't enough. They somehow thought that I had something to do with that story being told or something. I don't know what that was about. But for the most part, I've had, a very good, solid relationship with fans. And I just appreciate that without you guys, I don't have any purpose in what I do for a living. I like to, create characters. I like to make people laugh, and I like to make people cry. And I like it especially whether it's a play or the soap when a story challenges us to look at the world in a different way than maybe we did before. And when I get to be a part of that and be surrounded by talented directors and writers and actors, musicians, lighting designers, sound designers. I was asked about a piece of advice for aspiring actors, and I gave 4 or 5 different things, but one of them I said was, just be nice. Actors tend to think that they're the most important component, but they're really not. And without all these other people, we can't do our jobs well. And, just acknowledge that, for the most part, the people you're working with are probably pretty damn good at what they do, and give them the respect that they deserve for doing their job well. And just be nice to people. It's easy.
Yeah. Robert, I want to thank you for taking the time to come aboard my podcast. I've been trying to hunt you down for a long time, man, because I was a fan of and Reva. My mother was a fan as well, and I got a friend whose grandmother who had a lot of tapes of y'all from the 90s, a lot from 1992, and there's one tape I got here. This tape is when it's from 1990, and Billy and Vanessa was going to get remarried, but Billy was with Nadine. This was after Reba had died.
Right.
But I love the show. I was a big fan of it, and it led to me writing, which I'm doing now, and doing this documentary of the show to educate new people what the show is about. Because some people will ask me, "What was Gotten like?" and I would tell them.
Yeah,
this is before and the talk and everything else. But I appreciate you coming by. I had a good time.
I did watch the 2 clips you sent me, and I'd seen them before. I know I've seen them before, and that song was written by David Wingo, who is a good friend of mine, and good friends of Kim's, and he's a musician that works primarily out of Hilton Head, South Carolina, and he and his then wife Gail were down there when we were shooting that whole segment down there with Josh and Reva on the beach in Venezuela, where we're running in the waves. You had it in the clip there. And he wrote that song and presented it to our director, Bruce Berry, just handed him a cassette and said, "Hey, if you can use this on the show, you're welcome to it." And that's how that song ended up on the show. Yeah.
I love that song. And for a long time, I thought that singer who passed, Joe Crocker.
Joe Crocker.
I thought it was him who sung that song for a long time. But that clip, I have the whole episode on DVD. I uploaded that a few years ago with that clip, and then the other one I sent you was a montage. I did a Reva and Josh because I'm a fan of you guys. I did that a few years ago after college.
I saw that too. Both good, both really nice. So thanks.
Yeah, I thank you, Robert. And there was a couple of things we didn't touch on, but in December I'm having like an anniversary thing because it'll be a year since I've done my podcast, and I'll be asking a lot of people to come back. If you have some time in December, I hope maybe you could come back and we can talk some more.
Sure, just reach out and we'll make it happen.
Okay.
All right. Nice chatting with you.
Nice talking with you too. Have a good one.
Thank you. You too. Stay safe.
You too. God bless you.
God bless you too.
Well, guys, thank you for tuning in today. I'm sorry I couldn't get to a lot of y'all questions. I know a lot of y'all had asked some, but we was on the time frame, and there were some questions that I had already asked them, but I will get back to that. I'm gonna have it written down because in December it'll be my 1-year anniversary of doing podcasting, and I'm gonna have some guests come back. Let me see here. I did give a shout out about the daughters of Mara and Jeff Branson and Shane. Thank you, Mr. Naylor, for tuning in. We talked a bit about the Josh and Cassie Perrin I don't think it was a matter of, like what Robert was saying. I don't think it was a matter of them not wanting to write for Josh and Reva anymore, Mr. Banks. I think it was just a matter of Nicole was new, and like what Robert said earlier, that was something that they had in mind, like early on when Laura was gearing to leave the show. We did address that. Mr. Naylor, I'm going to talk about him on GH when if he gets a minute to come back in December. We're going to talk. We talked a bit about him and Kim. Karen, that was a question I was going to ask him about him working with Sharita Bauer, and the pair when he was in the hospital. I'm going to bring it up to him. And we talked about Larry and Jordan, and we're going to talk about the fountain scene as well. And commercials and TV from the past. Thank you for coming by again. It was a blast talking with him and many others. I forgot to tell him, anybody watching this, Carl Evans, who was the first Alan Michael Spaulding, is going to come by this coming Thursday. And we're going to talk about his time on the show as well. So stay tuned for that. There's much more to come. And hold on one second. Let me do this. Okay, here we go. Add some light. And until next time, have a good night now. And if anybody who enjoyed this interview, if you heard Robert, I asked him to come back in December because I'm having my 1-year anniversary get together. I'm asking people to come back. He's going to be back. So if anybody have any questions that I didn't get to, I'm sorry. I'll be sure to get to it in December if he has some time then. But stay tuned. Keep watching. I'm going to have more guests come on. And thank you. God bless you guys.